What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, and we are talking college football DFS. It is rivalry week, week 13, and the games are split between Friday and Saturday. So on this particular video, we will be talking about the Friday slate of games. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. But bringing you into the lab, here is our player usage tool where you can find everything these players have shown, all of their data, and everything you need to know for DFS. It's a big slate, so we'll get right into it. 12 games, big tournaments for this particular day as well, the day after Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to you all. First off, we have Texas 3-point favorite over Kansas State, 52.5-point total. Maybe surprising to some people at first glance, but Kansas State, they lost their starting quarterback, Skylar Thompson, last week, carted off the field, so would be shocked if he plays. Now, Will Howard has filled in the past. Jaron Lewis has filled it in the past. Will Howard should be the guy that gets the nod here. He's mobile, similar to Skylar Thompson. He leaves a little bit to be desired as a passer, and it's just ultimately a really low total game, and you're not getting that much of a discount going down to Howard. So I'm not sure how much of a value he truly is on this slate. We also know Kansas State particularly will run through Deuce Vaughn. They will give Deuce Vaughn a majority of their running back touches on the ground. He leads their team in targets through the air. He's only 1 yard behind Phillip Brooks for the team's total yardage lead. He's a little bit cheaper than some other elite backs on the slate. In Texas, they do have poor run defense. They allow over 200 yards per game there. So Deuce Vaughn, he actually, I think, is in play here. You're typically not targeting Kansas State pass catchers. So Phillip Brooks, Malik Knowles, Landry Weber, Sammy Wheeler, these guys aren't really in play here again because the quarterback change and so much goes through Deuce Vaughn. On Texas, another team battling injuries, limping into the latter stages of the 2021 season. Casey Thompson continues to be the quarterback. He's a game manager type player, needs negative game script to hit you a ceiling. And if you stack him, it's going to be with Worthy, Xavier Worthy, their freshman receiver. 13 targets last week, 20 the week prior, 83 yards per game, 8.6 targets per game overall this year. Jordan Whittington, returning from injury, did not really matter. He still dominated targets here, expecting much of the same, but he's a bit expensive. Whittington's a dart throw. Marcus Washington is the wide receiver 3, is a dart throw. Cade Brewer, tight end, dart throw. The backfield was closer to a 50-50 split than a lot of people thought. Roshan Johnson, 15 carries. Keelan Robinson, 9. And if we look at the targets, Roshan only had 1. Keelan Robinson had 3. So expecting a 50-50 split moving forward. Roshan still the preferred side of this at a cheaper price on DraftKings. Keelan cheaper on FanDuel. Ohio Bowling Green. So the MAC is mixed into this because it's rivalry week, and we have some games from these lower conferences on the main slate. This goes for Friday and Saturday. This is one. Ohio's a 6-point favorite, 48-point total in the game. Both these teams have struggled this year, but Ohio's kind of recently regained their form. They will play 2 quarterbacks, Curtis Rourke and Armani Rogers. Rourke will see about 80 to 90% of the snaps, and they use Armani as a dual threat on the ground. Neither are particularly strong plays in this game environment, but Rourke perhaps because he will see most of the work, but I still wouldn't trust it. The backfield, Demontre Tuggle's the lead back. He will split time no matter what. O'Shane Allison typically works in the 50-50 committee with Demontre Tuggle, but they have not updated his injury status, undisclosed, missed the last 2 games. Ohio does not have a beat reporter, so you won't know at all. You won't even know if he's warming up. So if you play Allison, just be weary. You will have no idea if he's actually active. Tuggle, he's locked into a timeshare no matter what. So it's a tough backfield to get to, even though Bowling Green allows over 200 rushing yards per game. Tuggle GPP only. The receivers, they just don't throw enough. Ohio, they're passing 43% of the time, running 67 plays per game. How much upside is there a guy for Tyler Walton, Cameron Odom? Isaiah Cox has 7 targets each in each of the last 4 games, but he's recently saw his routes drop, not playing any of them. Bowling Green, it's much of the same. Really slow. They're pass heavy, but they haven't had any semblance of efficiency. Matt McDonald's not mobile. He averages 209 yards per game on 32.5 attempts. He's just still too expensive. This is going to be a really slow game. Total's really low here. Bowling Green at just 21-point applied total. The backfield, we saw Jason Patterson miss their last game. Terrian Stewart went down with an injury, so that put Nick Mosley into a big role. But again, no injury updates for this conference. We'll have no idea what to do with the backs, who's active, who's not. And when all are healthy, they're going to mix these guys 4 ways. So it's a tough one to get to. The receivers, Tyrone Broden, Austin Osborne are the top 2 guys. Osborne, target leader on the year. Broden, receiving yardage leader. Christian Sims, their tight end, basically not playing Bowling Green. Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan. As far as MAC games on the main slate, this one's far more intriguing. Both teams are fast, particularly Central Michigan. Both teams are pass heavy, both above 50% pass rate. So this has explosive potential. Not to mention the defenses are both bad here. So Eastern Michigan, their best matchup comes against a poor Central Michigan pass defense. Ben Bryant is the quarterback, somewhat mobile, but not really. He's mainly known for his pocket passing, 245 yards per game on 31 attempts. He's awesome to stack with. Hassan Beydoun is the alpha. Tanner New missed most of the year with injury, but he's back and he's averaging nine targets per game over their last 79 yards per game, which is actually ahead of Beydoun. And Dylan Drummond's the wide receiver 3, and Drummond still averages 7.8 targets himself over the last 4 games. Beydoun's still the 1, followed by New. Then Drummond is the 3. They split their tight end reps. Backfield is a 3-way committee, but Juwan Hamilton recently worked well ahead of Samson Evans, ahead of Darius Boone. If you're throwing a dart, it would be with Juwan Hamilton, but there's better options. This is a three-way timeshare. For Central, their best matchup comes against a poor Eastern Michigan run defense that allows over 200 yards per game, setting up Lou Nichols, the most expensive back on the slate, for another smash spot. Nichols averages 137.5 yards per game on the ground, another 22 through the air. He has had 43 and 32 carries in back-to-back games, 4 and 2 targets in that span too. He's averaging 28 touches per game. Even at an elevated price tag, Lou Nichols is still in play. The floor is just incredible with him. In the past game, Daniel Richardson doesn't offer anything as a runner, but the attempts are there. And again, they're not reflected in the season-long stats because he split time with Jacob Sermon to start the year. But this passing offense sometimes just backdoors its way into 300 yards because it's so voluminous. He's easy to stack as well. You have Khalil Pimpleton, Ja'Cory Sullivan as the top 2 options here. Pimpleton, he's been the alpha, averaging 79.5 yards per game. Ja'Cory Sullivan dealt with injury, but he's been back and a mainstay in the offense. He averages more targets than Dixon, so he would be where I look there. Joel Wilson's the tight end. Boise State taking on San Diego State. Again, another lower type conference game here, and it's one that's interesting for DFS. It's not the best game environment on the slate, a 44.5 total, 2.5 point spread in favor of Boise, which is interesting. Boise plays fast. They're balanced. San Diego State is slower and run heavy. On the Boise side, Bachmeier is not mobile, so he basically needs a 300-yard passing game to get you the bonus and an elevated ceiling. He averages 259 yards per game on 33 attempts, but San Diego State plays strong defense. It's a tougher matchup for him. Luckily, Octavius Evans and Stephen Cobbs project to return. Evans returned in their last game already. Cobbs should be back here. Combined with Khalil Shakir, we should have all 3 of the top of the receiving core healthy. Shakir, he averages 95 yards per game on 9.6 targets, and he'll get some rushing attempts too. He's been banged out throughout the year, but he's still a clear stacking option. The backfield's a timeshare between Cyrus Habibi-Lukoyo and George Halani. Halani leads the way, but Cyrus still is very active. He's active in the pass game, and San Diego State only allows 84 rushing yards per game, so it's a tough situation to get to on the ground. For San Diego State, Lucas Johnson's taken over at quarterback. He is somewhat mobile with 172 yards on the ground, but he doesn't even average 100 as a passer because San Diego State plays so slow, and then they're really run heavy on top of it. So he's not really in play, and that stems down to the pass catchers. Jesse Matthews and Elijah Cothey are the top 2 options, but you're just going to get a middling projection on them. The leader for San Diego State averages just 30.5 receiving yards per game. In the backfield, Greg Bell is the leader here. And it's a decent matchup. Boise allowing 162 yards per game on the ground. And Greg Bell, he's ceded a little bit of work to Chance Bell and Keegan Williams and even Jordan Byrd, but he still is averaging 18 touches per game. So in this matchup and at this price, I think he's viable. Utah State taking on New Mexico, a 15.5 point spread in favor of Utah State, 50-point total overall. 2 teams that play very different. Utah State's extremely fast, 81 plays per game, balanced in their pass rate. New Mexico's extremely slow. And they've basically gone full triple option, as we'll get to. But Utah State, Logan Bonner beat out Andrew Peasley for the starting job. He's not the most mobile guy, but 72 yards on the ground this year. And then he averages 269 through the air on 32.5 attempts, which is solid. And what I like most about him is he's stackable. He's not the best option for DFS because he's so expensive. But if you want to use a receiver here and there, this is viable. Devin Tompkins, he's right there, averaging 139 yards per game on 11.9 targets. He's among the best receivers in the country. The wide receiver 2 is Derek Wright. He averages 50 yards per game on 5.9 targets. Then you have Brandon Bowling and Justin McGriff. These guys both play about 70% of the snaps. So you do have cheap viability here. And For value plays, McGriff, he's somebody you could look to below 4K. In the running back room, Calvin Tyler is working ahead of Elian Noah, and it's not that close. Tyler was hurt earlier in the year, so it's depressed his season-long stats a little bit, but 17.3 touches per game. He's been over that in each of the last two. There's some security here against a New Mexico defense allowing 160 yards per game, and they're 2 touchdown favorites, so I like him. On the New Mexico side, Terry Wilson's been hurt. They split the quarterback reps. I think we see some of Chavez, some of Trey Hall. It's a disaster. And on top of the crazy amount of quarterbacks they're playing, they went full triple option. They've been single digits in pass attempts over the last couple weeks. So none of the pass catchers are viable. The backfield is a nasty timeshare. Aaron Dumas leads a group that also involves Bobby Cole, Bobby Wooden, Bryson Carroll as another dual threat quarterback. Like, this team is not worth playing. Not to mention they're only implied for 17 points. Iowa, Nebraska, a low-scoring affair here, 41-point total, 1.5 point spread in favor of the Hawkeyes. That is moved towards Iowa because Adrian Martinez is out, but we'll get to that. Both teams are slow. Both teams are run-heavy. Spencer Petras is the quarterback for Iowa. He is a game manager, not mobile whatsoever, not active as a passer, doesn't project to be so here. He isn't really stackable either. The top 2 options are Sam Laporta, who's recently taken a major back step to Keegan Johnson. Johnson's played a much larger role for this team. And then Nico Reganey is kind of this ancillary slot type receiver. Ultimately, you're probably not stacking Iowa, but in GPPs, Keegan Johnson could make some sense at 3,500. Tyler Goodson's a bell cow back, an inefficient one at that. They lost 4 starting offensive linemen last year. They're playing with 4 younger guys, and it hasn't gone well for him. He's been very inefficient, 86 yards per game on 22.3 touches. What's redeeming about him is he's a good pass catcher, and this particular game, they're favored over Nebraska. So Goodson's a GPP play based on volume. Nebraska has a lot of injuries. Logan Smothers is taking over for Adrian Martinez, basically an unknown. He's mobile with 69 yards on the year, limited attempts, so we just don't know what he offers. You could play him in GPPs based on that. If he is anything close to Adrian Martinez, he'd be a great value. The run game, Ramir Johnson missed their last contest. That put Marquise Stepp, Marvin Scott, and even backup receiver Brody Belt into a rotation at running back. You're not targeting this against an Iowa defense barely allowing 100 yards per game on the ground. Samori Torre and Austin Allen are the top 2 pass catchers, Allen being the tight end. And outside of them, everybody else rotates. So paying $6K for Torre doesn't make a lot of sense to me. He averages just 6.2 targets per game on the year. Same with Allen. Then Omar Manning, Xavier Betts, Levi Falk, Oliver Martin are rotating the other receiver spots. Tough to get to. Missouri taking on Arkansas. Now we get to some better game environments. This one's a 62.5 point total, 14.5 point spread in favor of Arkansas. Both teams are fast. Missouri is very pass heavy. Arkansas is very run heavy. Now, looking at Missouri, Connor Basilick is a game manager, but he does have a lot of pass attempts. And while he only averages 249 yards per game on 35 attempts, that volume can be useful with pass catchers. Now, he's not mobile himself, so he's hard to stack. But if you're playing a pass catcher in a one-off or a stack, it's a little tough because Toski Dove leads the team in receiving yards, but Tyler Beatty has more targets than him, the running back. But if you're playing a receiver, I think Dove below 4K, Chisholm below 4K, they could be used. Those are the top 2 options. Barrett Bannister's the 3. And then we mentioned Beatty, who leads the team in targets. He's just an absolute usage monster for this team. He averages 126 yards per game, 26.7 touches. Again, leads the team in targets. Like, he's extremely active, and at an elevated price, even in a tough matchup, he's viable. On the Arkansas side, great matchup for them on the ground against one of the worst run defenses in the country. KJ Jefferson is mobile, so he benefits from this. He's not going to ever be a high volume passer, so stacking this offense is difficult, but he does offer some potential with his legs. If you're stacking, it's basically Treylon Burks or bust. And while he has a 31% target share, hasn't reached double-digit targets in any of the last 4 games because of the low volume. With that, you're not playing Warren Thompson, Tyson Morris. It's tough to get to any pass catchers. The backfield is interesting. Dominique Johnson played well ahead of Traylon Smith and Raheem Sanders in their second most recent game, but went back to full-blown timeshare in their most recent contest. Dominique Johnson, 9 carries to Traylon Smith's 9 carries. Raheem Sanders active as the best pass catcher. 3-way timeshare could be worth some darts because the matchup is really nice, but we just don't know who gets the work. I wouldn't be too afraid of going back to one of these guys, but I mean, maybe you just go all the way down and save on salary here. It's a tough spot to get to, and the slate overall is pretty tight in pricing. USF taking on UCF, the battle for Florida. We have Central Florida, favored by 18.5, 62-point total. Starting with the South Florida side, they're about average in terms of pace, a little below average in terms of pass rate. Timmy McClain's the quarterback. He's mobile, and they do run a lot of plays, so his numbers are somewhat depressed by the fact that he wasn't always the starter this year. Xavier Weaver is expected to be back. He's their alpha when healthy, and he'll split time with Jimmy Horn and Omari and Dallas, and DeMarcus Gregory also involved here. I think you're just playing Jimmy Horn if you're not playing Weaver because he's 3,600. You don't need to punt all the way down to Dallas and Gregory. The backfield's interesting. Brian Batty got hurt in their last game, but his status hasn't been updated. That let Kelly Joyner run pretty much ahead of Jared Mangham, ahead of Beatty himself. I think Kelly Joyner's interesting for tournaments. He's a good pass catcher. He has a 6-target game in their third most recent contest. He could be worth a look against the Central Florida team, allowing over 175 rushing yards per game. On the other side for UCF, Dylan Gabriel's expected to make his return after collarbone injury early in the year. 125 rushing yards for him. He's their best passer, and it's not even close. Would be a huge boon for this offense, and certainly stackable. It's 9K, but you could stack him with Ryan O'Keefe. They had Jalen Robinson return for their last 2 games. He should only continue to get healthier. He was previously the wide receiver 1 before getting hurt. Brandon Johnson's the 3. I think you could look to him even at a cheaper price, $5,800. Ultimately, it's probably O'Keefe or Jalen Robinson, but interested in Brandon as well. In the backfield, Isaiah Bowser's missed 2 straight games. They've rotated Johnny Richardson and Mark Anthony Richards. They've used Bowser as a bell cow when healthy, but I think just because he hasn't been able to hold up due to injury, you likely see this remain a timeshare. With that said, I mean, USF is allowing 218 yards per game on the ground. You could potentially look to one of these guys in GPPs because the matchup is so good, and I certainly will be doing so depending on who's healthy. Cincinnati taking on ECU, another good game for DFS, 14-point spread in favor of Cincinnati, 57 total. ECU is really fast. They're pretty pass-heavy, and that creates good game environments for their opponents. Cincinnati's looking at a playoff berth, so they can't lose these games. Ritter's a game manager at this point. He's more mobile than a lot of guys, 325 yards, but still less than previous seasons, 243 yards per game through the air. ECU is a decent defense. They're worse on the ground. So Ritter, I think, still at this price, he's a fantasy game manager, and there's better players available for the price. Jerome Ford returned, and we didn't see any limitations. 19 carries for Jerome Ford, 2 targets right out of the gate. He's a cheaper bell cow, I think, worth targeting at 8,300. Again, you save a little bit from the Lou Nichols, the Deuce Vaughns of the world. A little less active, but team total really high. Matchup sets up here. Love Jerome Ford. Because we're not playing a lot of Ritter, it's hard to stack him. Like Alec Pierce, their leading receiver, he averages just 5.8 targets per game, and he's 6,700. That's laughable. And then their wide receiver 2, Michael Young, missed their most recent contest, letting Trey Tucker and Tyler Scott run a little bit more. But typically those guys are in a timeshare, and that stems to Leonard Taylor and Josh Wiley at tight end as well. For ECU, Holden Allers is the quarterback, 226 rushing yards on the year. He is mobile. He just doesn't always use it, and he really benefits from volume, ECU being fast and pass heavy. But this is their toughest matchup of the year. So Allers is a little expensive for my liking. If you do play him, and maybe you don't play him, but you run one of these receivers as a one-off or a run back to a stack, Tyler Snead's the 1. Adi Omatosho is the wide receiver 2. And then CJ Johnson's the 3. And Omatosho at 44, CJ Johnson at 39. Those are pretty nice options for opposite sides of a stack. If you're running Cincinnati stacks or even just playing forward, I like using one of these guys. The backfield is a 2-way timeshare between Keaton Mitchell and Rajai Harris. Keaton Mitchell has been extremely efficient, and we can't say the same about Rajai Harris. They have nearly identical carries, 157 for Mitchell, 152 for Harris. But Mitchell has 1,062 yards to Harris's 557, and they haven't made the backfield more than a timeshare. It's still a pure timeshare between the two. They won't give Mitchell more opportunities, which is frustrating. But in this spot, like Rajai Harris for the same workload as Mitchell at a much cheaper price, you have to at least think about it. But it's not going to be one I take a huge stand on. I think this could remove the timeshare at any point. I don't know if they will continue or not. But it's a tougher game on the ECU side. I like some pieces on Cincinnati. UNLV taking on Air Force in the Mountain West, a 50.5-point total, 18-point spread in favor of Air Force. It's a spot where Air Force has just been surging, and UNLV's played a lot of really close games, but really tough games. Cameron Friel got hurt, and it looks like Justin Rogers is in line to start. He's somewhat mobile, but hasn't shown it in a small sample this year. I would not be interested because UNLV is already really slow, balanced in pass rate, but Air Force runs the triple option. They're going to depress your play rate. Charles Williams has an elite workload on the ground. He's averaging over 100 yards per game on pure volume, 22.8 touches per game. Air Force plays good defense, but Charles Williams has received enough volume to backdoor his way into some productive contests. I think the ceiling is questionable based on their 18-point underdogs. They only have a 16-point implied team total. The receiving room, Kyle Williams has recently taken a back seat. Only about 20% of the routes last week. Steve Jenkins, Giovanni Fiolo, the tight end, Marcus Phillips, and Zyle Griffin all worked ahead of him. That's reflected in routes and targets and snaps. So I'm not sure what to make of it, but Jenkins is probably the preferred option. Otherwise, you're just punting with Phillips or Zyle. There's a lot of injuries in this receiving core. Like Mendiola Jensen hasn't played in any of the last 4 games. Kaleo Bulunge hasn't played in a long time. I don't know what to make of this team, and I'm probably not targeting them anyway. Air Force, triple option team that runs primarily through the fullback. Brad Roberts, he averages over 105 yards per game, 23.5 carries. He's a pretty strong play here. Again, no pass catching upside, so that is a little concerning. Hazik Daniels doesn't have a ton of upside himself. Nearly 700 rushing yards, but again, so much flows through Brad Roberts that it's tough to get to him. The backup running back on the year, it has been Omar Fatah, but he hasn't played in the two most recent games. So Emmanuel Mitchell has played more, 14 carries in the last game, 3,300 for him. I'm concerned about the workload, but he could step up. DeAndre Hughes, the receiver, also had 22 carries. He hasn't actually really been very active as a pass catcher, but perhaps in this like slot back world, DeAndre Hughes could make some sense. They also use Dane Kinnaman a decent amount there, who's not in the player pool in DraftKings. You're not targeting any of the receivers. Brandon Lewis is the most active receiver. He has about 4 targets per game, which is essentially the same amount of carries he has per game. But I think you'd rather just play maybe an Emmanuel Mitchell for a cheaper price and hope that he gets more carries. But Brad Roberts is certainly in play. Colorado taking on Utah. 24-point spread here in favor of the Utes, 51.5-point total. Both teams are slower, particularly Colorado, due to inefficiency. Both teams are very run-heavy. Brandon Lewis has been one of the worst signal callers in football. He only has 173 rushing yards, and he's mobile, but he just takes so many sacks, 27, that it hasn't really made a difference. Only 132 pass yards per game. That's going to be tough against a strong Utah defense. Also very hard to stack. Like they lost Chenault. He left the program. You're just not playing anybody in the pass corps. Dimitri Stanley is their top option, 3,100 for him, coming back from an injury, but nobody averages more than 3 targets per game. Nobody averages more than 27 yards. Not doing it. Jarek Broussard has worked well ahead of Alex Fontenot of late, and he's a good pass catcher. But again, this stems to efficiency. And Broussard at 4,500, yes, he's going to be a little active in the pass game. Fontenot is still stealing stuff. And when you have a team this bad, projected for such a low total, not even 14 points, like you can't have timeshare. So Broussard and Fontenot are out. For Utah, Cameron Rising, he is a mobile quarterback, and he averages 193 passing yards per game on 25 attempts, extremely efficient. You just would think that game script probably is not in his favor. I mean, Colorado allows over 185 yards per game on the ground. This could be full game manager mode for Rising, but he has upside. In the backfield, Tavion Thomas returned from injury, outcarried TJ Pledger 21 to 10. I know a lot of people wanted to play Pledger last week, but he's just going to be a timeshare back. Same with Micah Bernard, Chris Curry. These guys are mixing in, just change of pace touches. Tavion's the guy you want to play here, and I'm fine with him at his price tag. The matchup's very good. He's been very efficient. Again, he's only averaging 14.5 opportunities per game, but in every game he's played, he's been over 20 carries of late. In the receiving room, Brant Kuithe, he's their leading target getter over the last 4 games. Britton Covey's taken a back seat, and even like Solomon Enos, Devon Vele, they've had more targets than him of late, and the routes have dropped for Covey too. So I'd rather just go all the way down to the mid and play Vele, who I think is viable here. He plays on almost every snap, 4.3 targets per game over their last 4. He's certainly in play. Last game, we have TCU taking on Iowa State, 59-point total, pretty solid overall. Both teams slow. TCU's run focus in Iowa State. They've embraced the pass more of late, some out of necessity, but they've also had more success there. But Chandler Morris is hurt, still Max Dugan's back, somewhat mobile, limited as a passer, mainly because of the offense. And that's going to be interesting here because Iowa State's weaknesses against the pass. But I think Dugan, outside consideration here because of the game environment. In the backfield, no Zach Evans, but Kendre Miller did return from injury. Still out carried by Amari DeMercado, 18-12. That could flip at any point. I'm expecting more of a 50-50 timeshare here because Kendry's been so efficient when healthy. I think there are options in tournaments, but not strong ones. Quentin Johnson looks like he's not going to play here. That means Darius Davis, Quincy Brown, and Blair Conrad are the top three. Tay Barber's in the mix here too. He played last week. He just didn't get a target. You're still probably not stacking TCU, but ultimately I think these guys are in play because of the strong game, and I maybe would use one as a run back. Tay Barber at 3,400 could make a lot of sense. For Iowa State, again, huge favorites here. So Brees honestly makes a little more sense than normal, but he hasn't received the discounted price, even though he hasn't been great this year. He's still averaging 111 yards per game on the ground. Through the air, he's active, 24.5 receiving yards, 25 touches per game for Brees. If you can afford him, I think you go for it. The matchup's very nice with TCU, allowing 232.5 rushing yards per game. Purdy's been excellent this year, probably his most statistically efficient season of his career, but still suffers from some low volume issues at times. That's corrected lately. So there is a ceiling with Purdy at 6,600. You just hope they don't take the air out of the ball as big favorites. And when you stack him, we finally saw the prices converge between Charlie Kolar and Xavier Hutchinson. That's where they should be. Now, neither are cheap this week, but I think both are in play for stacks. Not my favorite stacks overall, but you could get to them. One of them maybe even. And then behind them, Jalen Noel has emerged as the clear wide receiver 2 in the offense behind Hutchinson. If you count Kolar as the pass catcher, he's the third option. So Noel at 3,700 could be someone you look to, averaging 5.8 targets per game over their last 4. But that's the main slate. It's a little gross, but there are some spots. I like the fact that they mixed in the lower conferences. Let me know your favorite play in the comment section. Would love to hear it. Otherwise, I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you again next time.